Sebastian and me had a long chat about what to tell you in the keynote, what could be interesting for the audience and so on. And we were then thinking about that we should focus on documentation and that it's how JabRef does it. And on the other hand, it should be also my research, because I was more than a decade in your university and did a research on harvesting architectural knowledge and making the architectural knowledge available to the developers. And this is one result I'm going to present. For myself, I'm with the JabRef Foundation. Pardon?
Oh, I think someone has their microphone not muted.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, now it's better. You can continue.
Okay, not that for spontaneous question. Okay, and now I'm with the JabRef Foundation, and we are working towards making JabRef even more sustainable until now. Right, and all the things I'm talking about are available on rdr.github.io. But now let's start. What are architectural decisions? Maybe you heard someone saying, let us use Angular and Spring for a web application because everybody else does it. It will look good on our CV. Or someone else saying, we chose JSON as our JSON Java parser because of its superior performance shown in some tool, the active community support for it. The thing is that also Gary Booch notices that architectural decisions are design decisions that are costly to change, which means if someone decides something just out of the blue, it could and not very well thought about it, it could be hard to change and maybe the wrong thing. Therefore, one should really think harder about a decision. But now how to document it, because normally there are Word documents, conferences, and so on. But you hardly meet anyone really reading it. People just want to code. Even, especially in the open source field, they want to open their IDE and support and code. And this is where MADR jumps in. I think there are two streams of architectural decision guys. And one stream is the Michael Nygård thing, and also highlighted in the ThoughtWorks technology radar. They say lightweight architectural decision records should be adopted because much documentation can be replaced by highly readable code and tests. In a world of evolutionary architecture, however, it's important to record certain design decisions for the benefit of future team members as well as for external oversight. And then they say, lightweight architectural decision records is a technique for capturing important architectural decisions along with their context and consequences. We recommend storing these details in source control instead of a wiki and a website, as they can provide a record that remains in sync with the code itself. For most projects, we saw no reason why you wouldn't want to use this technique. And I fully agree. The only thing where I debate is the format. And this is a strong debate which format to use. And we came up with the Markdown architectural decisions. And here you see our minimal format. And we say we have as usual as the title of the solved problem and solution, some context and problem statement. And the context is that you should describe the context and the problem in a free form of 2 or 3 sentences, or in the form of a question. And then the main difference to other things are the options, because we think all options considered should be put in one place. Like the JSON parser we had as example, one should say, okay, I also investigated Jackson or a handwritten thing, and all options should be listed here. The reason is that if someone reviews a project or comes in new and has some ideas like, oh, well, why didn't you use Kotlin for implementing? Did you even consider Kotlin? And maybe there was another guy half a year ago also saying, oh, Kotlin is the best thing ever. Then Kotlin will be there as considered option. And then say, okay, we didn't consider Kotlin because of AD3D. these options are very, very important to us. Okay, and then later, these are the options listed, but they don't list the chosen one. And then after listed the available options, we list the decision outcome, like option 1, because. And then the minimal form would be just a normal justification, because it's the only option to grow, or which meets a decision driver, or which resolves a force, or comes out best, where you can list pros and cons. I will come to that later. How are we using MADRs in JabRef? If you go to the GitHub thing in JabRef, there's a docs directory and ADRs, and there's a full list of ADRs. Currently, we are at number 17, where number 0 is just to use Markdown architecture decision records. You see the plain text files, and let's jump into one. One example matter, freshly from the repository. The title is Allow org JabRef model to access JabRef logic. This is a huge discussion in our team, how to do a proper internal software package architecture in JabRef. On the one hand, maintainable, and on the other hand, not confusing newcomers. It's also newcomer friendly, and which means how to create a maintainable architecture, but also how to split the model and the logic and the UI thing. Also how to properly split that in the context of JabRef. As I said, newcomers should find the architecture split natural, not that they, if they start to say, oh, what's going on here, but say, okay, well, I feel at home. It's something like all projects did. And the architecture should be a help to implement something and not a burden that each time I introduce a new feature, I have to think of hours how to do that my architecture tests don't fail. And we thought about 3 options. Here should be logic. That org JabRef logic uses the model only, that it's only one direction. And that the model may use logic in defined cases only, which means an exception to that rule. Or you can say, okay, well, I just arbitrarily sorted the things in and they can access each other and no worries, just go on. And we opted to say, okay, JabRef model may use JabRef logic in defined cases because comes out best, see below. And then let's look at the pros and cons of the things. The org JabRef logic uses a model and not the other way around. This would be a clear separation of model and logic that's only in one direction. But the bad thing is this leads to an anemic domain model. This is a pattern of Martin Fowler where he says, okay, you should put in some logic into the model to make it more self-contained and not just a dumb data transfer object. A model should be more. The second option was the defined cases one. It's good because model logic are still separated. Neutral thing is because each exception has to be discussed and agreed, which puts effort to the team. But it's bad because newcomers have to be informed that there are certain agreed exceptions to model to access logic. So this is then the hard part. And the third option would be model and logic may access each other freely, and it's bad. Bad because of spaghetti code, bad because coupling is increased, and the cohesion inside model is decreased. Yeah, and this is now our thing, and each time we discuss whether a package should go into model or logic, or whether there should be an access thing. We just pull out this decision and say, okay, do these arguments still hold? Do we need to modify something? Do we need to make clear something, or is it just like that and we go for it? And the last weeks turned out to be just well to do this defined cases thing. Okay. Now having seen MADR, I just go back. We saw that we could have MADR in the docs ADR thing. if we open that in the IDE, it turns out that we've got the JabRef code. So this is IntelliJ, and in IntelliJ here you have the file explorer with the docs directory. Then there's the ADR with the access model logic thing here. Here the ADR just presented with the rendering. And now the question is it really close to the code? Does any developer open the docs folder? Which is some open question. Doesn't the developer just code and don't care about the ADRs? And then one idea is to bring the thing even more closer to the code and to have code annotations there. And here is an example that we just have a new annotation MADR for MADR with the MADR 1, and the title would be implement anti-abyssal logic as POJO, some context and problem statement, some alternatives listed, the chosen alternative, the justification, and some links to other decisions, just as annotation there. The developer just writes it and then has it there. And then say one could say, okay, well, why should I write so much text? I've got Javadoc, and why should I write that thing? Then we played around with another idea to say, okay, we just have add ADR as annotation, meaning with the number here, and then the meaning is that ADR1 points to ADR0001. And then you know, okay, then I've got to jump to docs ADR and open the ADR so that you can have a quick jump from the code to the ADR text and back. And this is the current visual state, and that we go for that. And hoping that guys know how to click, because we currently don't have any IDE support. It will come later, but now nothing is implemented in that. And so okay, this is now for the embedded case. Now saying going deeper into the meta thing to one project. But what if I'm going to start a new project? Let's say here in a new project, the first decision is, after I opted for Java, which build tool to use. Like, should I use Maven, Gradle, AND, and so on, with some pros and cons? And then I say, okay, in my context, maybe I've got good Gradle engineers, then it's no question that I use Maven or AND. I just stick with Gradle. In another project could be there's a company policy, and so on. And in JabRef, we opted for Gradle. Right, for these options, Maven, Gradle, and we opted for Gradle because of reasons. And in another project, we opted for Maven because of other reasons. Okay, and then now think about it. Is it possible to generalize the thing, that one has some generalized knowledge? And to guide you through the process how we come to generalize architectural decision records, I just jump into MADR again. Here the MADR has a title, context, decision drivers with options, and some decision outcome referencing one option. And we've got some status deciders and date thing. Also MADR has options, okay. And now if we generalize the thing, we introduce inheritance here. Say, okay, title, context, and decision driver still stays the same, still has options, but we pulled out the concrete decision outcome here, so that we have some generalized things, and then some concrete things, like the build tool, that there is a decision to use a build tool is a generalized ADR, but the concrete thing, like using Gradle for a build tool, is a concrete MADR. And this is something a colleague of mine researched on it. He calls the whole thing problem space and solution space. And in my terms, these are the generalized things. And these are the concrete things. Like here, you have got the community asset crafted by a knowledge engineer, and its purpose is a design guidance with a problem in it, and addressed by an option, and the option may raise another problem, and which you then have discussed. Maybe if you, just example, if you decide on a programming language, the next problem you have to think of is the build tool, and then the option using Java raises the concrete problem of which build tool to use in Java world. Again, this is then the whole thing is are nuggets of advice in a problem space. And if now start a new project, I get to the concrete project, and I'm a solution architect. I've got a decision backlog, and then I have the problems in my solution space, and I've got some options I have to choose. Yeah, and some process around it. I skipped that. And now for the concrete example, we already started some generalized architectural decision records in our organization. We started with some generic decisions like snake case, camel case, whatever case for variable names, or how to name some folders. These are collected here, and some generalized things regarding in the Java world, or what to do here. And we just started to collect something. The build tool is one of it. And what's missing in our current toolscape? For the experts, the summary would be missing tooling, AD mentor in the web, and now you're overloaded with a tool. This tool is some helping tool for either solution architects or for knowledge engineers to gather the options and the chosen options. And here the color code is like, I've got the option service scope granularity, and I chosen the course thing, and here's and I neglected the define granular thing. And now I've got some color code what it did. This is just an enterprise architect plugin, and we call for a new thing available in the web to make it more accessible to users. Okay, that's the thing on the, okay, which directly leads me to go do the conclusion and outlook. I think I hopefully called for using MADR as lightweight decision record format in all your projects, which means no project anymore without MADR. You should always document your decisions in MADR. I also talked about the generalized things, how to harvest decisions out of existing projects into new ones. Currently manual work, but maybe we can automate that somehow. And for the outlook things, the basic thing would be to craft a GitHub pull request check. Is at least an ADR referenced in each pull request, so that if each contributor comes in, he says, okay, I am aware of ADR 1, 2, 3. And in the context of JabRef, it would be, I as contributor, I am aware of the separation of logic and model, and I really follow that. Or I am aware that all decisions should be recorded in MADR or whatever. Yeah, that at least an ADR is referenced. Or that he crafted a new ADR to say, okay, I made a decision. The next step would be a better tooling for governance. I shortly showed AD mentor, which was a bit overwhelming. One should really think about a better accessible UI in the web, so that as a chief architect, I can monitor all my projects, or at least that I can do a deep dive in one project and say which package is covered of ADRs and which is missing ADRs. Do I really need ADRs there, or is it optional? Yeah, and definition of the whole process for collecting the jitters, and then the real hard work to really collect the jitters and really craft them into this repo here. Yeah. For more information, is RTL GitHub IO with all projects, all prototypes we have there, and you reach me personally on Twitter with that nick. So thank you for the attention, and I'm curious about your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Very interesting talk and concept. Before I ask anything, is there anybody in the audience who wants to ask the first question?
Can I ask? It's Neil.
Yeah, hey, Neil, and go ahead.
Hey, Oliver, thanks for a really interesting talk. I guess my first question was, when you say, you know, for example, a pull request should check for an ADR. I mean, clearly not every pull request will be, I would think, architectural in nature. So I guess what I'm getting at is whether there's an easy way for you to separate, you know, things that you think should be looking at ADRs and things that shouldn't be looking at ADRs.
Yeah, I have no clue how to separate that. No clue. The thing is, what this is a bit more provocative, the thing, to make the ADR concepts more known, that the people are really pushed to work on ADRs. And even if an ADR says each line of code should be covered by a unit test, or each change should be covered by a unit test, and this is the decision of the project. Maybe you also, with the question, you point to the thing that the A in ADR may be misleading, like, because architecture is more like a big thing, which packages and so on, but we see more as a decision record, and the A is not important. It could be also for any decision record, but it's more historic reason that we keep the word architecture here. It's a long discussion. Yeah.
And I think some of the decisions you're talking about, we don't even need to document if the pull request, you know, like in a bot context, that it's already checking this, then the ADR becomes whatever the bot has been trained to do. So for example, it's already checking style, for example. You don't need a ADR, maybe you just say the bot is implementing the ADR.
Yeah.
Or when you use Sonar, you have quality gates that you can set, basically. So I guess the point is that there may be other ways of capturing design decisions. And I guess you want to prevent duplicating information, or would you rather duplicate something like that? I guess it's a more or less a question for Oliver. So what Neil said and what I added, how do you deal with information that is maybe documented in a different way, maybe even better documented somewhere else? Would you then have like a meta ADR pointing to all those sources?
Yeah, sure. Sure, just because to train each developer, look at the ADRs. This is the thing you have to know. And then from there, the pointers to all things. For sure, not everything is maybe a decision. This is also what we should research. Is it possible and accessible if we put everything in the decision? Like, even if we have got something, it's the only option. This is open. And the other thing is also how to really structure the ADRs to make it accessible. Because with the 17 now it's easy, but if I start to have 100 things, how to guide the developer through the things and so on. This has been because I call for better tooling for governance. This is all hidden here. Because people say, okay, well, if I've got a huge project with millions lines of code, how does it work with ADRs? Yeah, I've got then 125 end ADRs and how to manage it. And we thought about labels, how categorization, put in sub-matters and referencing them, but it's not finished, just open.
Okay, Neil, anything to add? Or did this answer your question?
Well, I guess the follow-up question, and maybe you're not allowed to talk about this, but it's, you know, what would Daimler be doing right now if they're not doing ADRs, and is it something that they could use there as well, given how gigantic their code base must be?
Pardon, who wants to start ADRs? Or
Daimler, isn't that where you're at Daimler?
Okay. Well, the thing is, I'm here as a person and not with Daimler. I cannot say anything about my company.
Fair enough. But I'm sure it's interesting.
Sure, and I could do a wild guessing that Daimler has suppliers, and suppliers are aware of ADRs and starting to do it.
Thanks.
So any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, hi, Christoph here. Hi, Oliver. Looking forward to your AMA tomorrow. If I don't get through all my questions today, I'll ask some tomorrow. The question I was going to ask is actually a bit of a follow-up to Neil's, I think. I'm assuming there could be very good ADRs and there could be not so good ADRs, right? So I think, you know, if I'm a bad developer, as I would be, you know, I would just write an ADR that sort of applies to all pull requests. You know, code should always have, I don't know, methods in it or something stupid like that. Then I can reference it and I pass that check easily. In your experience, what are sort of the hallmarks of a good ADR?
Also for now, we did a human review always, like that we sat together with 3 persons and said, okay, what should the ADR be, and whether everything is in it, and what are our review criteria. That it's maybe what you said. It's how obvious is it? As like if it's so obvious, then we just skip it. It maybe maybe at first had a bad method, but the lines of the ADR, like in the ADR with 10 lines, is maybe not as good as with 20 lines. But it's a difficult metric, I know. Yeah. But what I want to say, because we had a long discussion about the special fields in JabRef, and I was a hard fighter to put in groups, and for the others was it so clear that it should be not groups, but it kept it a separate feature, which means none of us would really written an ADR, but we started to write it to really document the facts, and then it turned out it was 50 lines or something like that with the pros and cons. I can't come up with hard metrics, because some ADRs maybe take 3 pros and cons and it's good. Some need 5 pros and cons, some need 10. Some don't need pros and cons. It's some kind of experience. So I couldn't come up with some metrics for now.
Would you? Sorry, Christoph.
Sense.
Christoph, do you want to add anything?
I was just going to say that makes perfect sense. I was more wondering, you know, examples of maybe really good ones or examples of things that you know, you've thrown out pretty quickly. But I think I got that from the answer. Thanks.
Okay.
Maybe in addition to what Christoph asked, so you would review those ADRs like normal code changes, like normal code review, or do you think there's a different process that the project should use when this scales? I mean, up to now you can maybe just talk to the main decision makers of the project and then just write those ADRs, but in a larger project, and if it gets adopted, and you need some process to review them. And it's not always the same people reviewing them. How would you do this?
Well, it depends on the project setup. What you just outlined, like if I've got a huge project with 100 persons, maybe there's an architecture guild, and then the architecture guild is the one like the normal review. We request for comments and so on. Also like they have their process. Also in my setting, it's a JabRef with 6 mainly developers, and then we can just share the knowledge. And if it's a really debatable thing, then we do it in the developer call. But for larger projects, it should be the normal architecture guild, so should do it. And even then, the discussion comes up: is a mono repo the thing to go? Should it be a separate architectural repo? But if it's a separate architectural repo, does the developer really read the thing? Is the Java annotation enough to guide the developer to it, or should we have some weekly architecture updates? Yeah, this is the normal software engineering communication, this discussion. There's no more ideas on that.
Okay, yeah, sounds reasonable to me. Are there any follow-up questions or other questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Hideaki.
Hey.
I have a different question. So, simple question. So, are you aware of new GitHub feature, GitHub discussion? It will be available soon. So, do you plan to use GitHub discussion for discuss MADR?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the feature of discussions, but I think it's a good thing. Because currently, what cases did we have? We had a case that a new contributor just wrote an ADR, and I really liked it and just went through. And some other things were like tough discussions, which we did in a phone conference. But we also have our GitHub channel to discuss things. There was not an ADR for now, but GitHub seems to me more chaotic and so on, and the GitHub discussion feature seems to be a good place for that. Maybe that also one can link things. Yeah, I think that one tough part at ADRs is that it's plain English text people have to write, and code is some other kind of text, and that sometimes it happens that someone is really good at coding, but to be precise in the ADR, to say, okay, this ADR is crafted like that the other people can understand, like a basic level of English, a basic level of structure, a basic level of presentation of that. And I really had one case where it was not that good. One has to really invest energy on polishing the thing, but it's similar to normal code. But what I say, the level of English is not always the level of code, and this could be some difficulties. And our aim is to be open and to really support people to make it better, and then say that all contributors are brave enough to work in ADRs and also to work on code. Yeah, both.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Welcome.
I also have a follow-up. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is Raula. So in regards to just governance, but maybe it's more about in the open source environment. Like you have many contributors, and especially people who are also new to the project. Or do you find when dealing with ADRs, will everybody fall in line, or do you find that people will just create their own different kinds of ADRs? Like coming in, like when you're dealing with a large group of contributors, then everyone has their own design decision.
This is I would be really happy if everyone would write in ADR, that they are getting used to the flow of writing. But then I really have to be the kind reviewer to say, okay, well, nice that you have written something, but I'm sorry, your ADR is already written down there, maybe with some other pros and cons. Could you please take your work and port it to the other ADR somehow? But you really touched the point, what you do in large projects with a large documentation, how to find out that something is already covered. Like the same thing one has with normal documentation. If they have got 400 wiki pages, and you don't know in which wiki page to add something. Same as like if we were at a state that there are 500 ADRs, how to handle that. And this is then the architecture guild or whatever thing, then having to review and to say, okay, thank you for the contribution, but could you please maybe include it somewhere else? There's no way for automating, just human brain needed.
Yeah, I think those are very interesting future research opportunities or like challenges that people can actually look into.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So any other questions from the audience? Again, feel free to also use chat, and I'll try to read it out to Oliver. In the meantime, I have another question. It's again a bit in the direction of information duplication. So I really like this Java annotation feature that you can basically write those ADRs in as code comments or annotations, as I said. When would you use this format opposed to Javadoc? For example, you could have a Javadoc comment in the package info.java, or on a package level, basically documenting the decision versus this format.
The decision driver was easy to implement checkers for it. And Java annotations are fully supported by Java EE ecosystem, whereas in Javadoc, the first 30 seconds of Google did not come up with anything useful. It was more an implementation issue than the other thing. And our gut feeling also said that maybe IDE support could be easier for these kinds of annotations, but it's just no long research spent on that. So if we dive into that topic again, sure, the Javadoc thing will come up again, because it's more documentation than a runtime annotation. And because this is no runtime at all, it's just normal thing. I think same discussions with the null annotations. Because in null annotations could also be documentation only, and then went to documentation only, and although compile time only.
Yeah, exactly. I recently stumbled over that as well, because some of the nullable, non-null, not null annotations are actually runtime checked. So, for example, if you use Lombok and then there's a runtime check added, and for others it looked the same. It's just a static analysis.
Yeah, right. One could say how to statically analyze the ADRs, like which tool can understand the natural text written there, and then say, okay, well, that doesn't match anymore. Therefore, it really calls for it's a Javadoc thing, for sure. And then we should write a plugin there. But for the first shot, it was easier because this already has a check that here's a list of strings, here's a string, and so on. It was easier, like, to implement a Java thing. This was only the only decision driver. But and please don't ask whether we wrote a MADR for it.
Okay, then maybe in the same direction, but different format. Let's say, what about this contributing Markdown files in the root repository, root directory of your repository? Versus ADRs. So when would you put something in a contribution guide, and when would you capture it as architectural decision records? For example, you mentioned using a certain programming language. Would you repeat it in the contribution guide and say, hey, for this project we use whatever, Java and Spring Boot or whatever, and then point to the ADR justifying this decision? I guess it's again about duplication of information.
Yeah, but this is the thing we were doing. It's like this. What we discussed before, is the set of ADR enough for documentation, or should it be like you said? Okay, I need to have a red red line or some kind of information flow through the documentation, then say, okay, for the interested readers, please refer to that for the thing. And I think this is the way to go, to have a contribution guide forming the main line. This is the project goes. And then for each thing, okay, like you said, build tool, code style, whatever, the 2 spaces versus 4 spaces, the discussion, say, okay, this is our ADR. The things, the interesting, as for me, the interesting thing is the target audience for ADRs, because if one talks to system architects, it's naturally clear to say, okay, this, I know this format, maybe here, is it really, should you really put the options in one file or not? This is a huge discussion, but there's no discussion that whether one really needs ADRs. But if one talks to junior developers in the Bachelor of Software Engineering, maybe, yeah, they say, hey, ADRs, what? My teacher says use that, and then I use that, no questions, and I don't Google, I just move on, and how to connect them, how to say, okay, please take a step back and think about your things, or try to understand why we did that. This is really hard to tell. And yeah, we were in, yeah, and since JabRef is also some kinds of training thing to train students for things, we try to position ADRs at very high to train students also to craft them, but it's really hard. It's the first ADR is the hardest. Yeah. Like the options mostly goes, but mostly it's okay. But the pros and cons is like, who is difficult. Because with a system architect has years of experience making decisions, and then writing something down is clear. Just, yeah, I know it, blah, 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 and then it's okay. But if for third-year developer, it's really hard to come out with the right pros and cons. As right in the sense of that more experienced developers agree on the things.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think maybe students also struggle because, I mean, as you mentioned, it's a decision that usually architects would do in a larger project, and maybe students lack the experience just to see this, that it makes sense to document these kinds of decisions. For them, it's just a programming language, just deciding on a framework. But if you have to live with that decision for a couple of years, yeah, maybe it's worth documenting. Maybe it's just experience that comes into play there. And maybe one other question that has nothing to do with information duplication, or maybe it has. What are alternative formats for documenting this? I guess these kinds of decisions were documented also before this was around, and I know other projects use Markdown in a very informal way to document software, but I mean, it's the first step to store it together with the source code, and there you are free to use whatever you like, text, XML, Markdown. But are you aware of other frameworks having a more structured way of documenting these design decisions?
You mean that table?
Oh yeah, right.
I just try to start with. This is some background on MADR. How did we come up with MADR? This is the second stream of community. It's like Uwe Stun and Kapila, Tran, and Zimmermann, with sustainable architectural decision records. And this is the same line of argumentation I pulled out, that one writes the context, facing some concern, decided for the option, neglected other options to achieve something, accepting something, because this is the format they come up. And they said just you have to write it as text somewhere in the wiki or whatever. And in the whole work they did, they also compared it with other things, and their template is here. And they said, okay, which which parts does an ADR have, some ID, outcome, maybe requirements, some accountability, software viewpoint trace, why answers, like which, why is the whole thing happen, decision drivers, like you know from the pattern community, what forces do I have, which assumptions do I have, then the options, then the concrete problem, decision dependencies, yeah, okay, and these are the why statements from him, like picking out the best things, coming out of 6 elements. I think this is the most important entry in this table, is 6 elements. And there's an IEEE template with 9 elements. Then there's an IBM UMF architectural decision table with 13 elements. The Tyree thing with 14, the Bredemeyer 9 thing, Nygaard 5. Nygaard was the one I presented at first, the short thing he did. And that's also the ARC 42 with 5 thing. And for the more, what is the question with the more formal things, I would answer then maybe one of these here. Mm-hmm. But all of them are outside of the code. And I know that choosing the documentation language is not that hard task. The thing is, I want to come up with, if a developer checks out something and it's not a mono repo where I've got all documentation in, I want to have the things stored there in an accessible way without any JSON format, any XML format, and so on. Where do we need any tool? I just wanted to have something where you can open in any text editor, and therefore we opted for Markdown in it for some of these things here. And I would also argue that our Markdown format is more formal than some text writing some why statements, because it's really unstructured somehow. And also the risk is there that some words are different, and maybe you need, if you want to write down the options, maybe the text gets longer and longer and longer. We already started parsing our MADRs and creating some. Do I have the screenshot? No, I have the screenshot. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. You need much text here now. We've got the generalized repo here. This is the generalized. This is here the JabRef repo, and this is the Eclipse Winery repo with all ADRs in there. And this figure says, okay, one ADR is in all 3 repos. This is the Gradle, as the build tool thing. And there are then other ADRs not related to each other. And yeah, and then there you can type in your repos, and then it goes on. And how did I take that thing? With the meta parsing, that it's structured enough to work on tooling. Mm-hmm. As I know that this tooling is not ready for some commercial companies. It's much work to do, but at least it's a start showing that it works.
Yeah, actually, I attended some what was it? Some virtual meetup thingy about this ARC 42. So this would have been the follow-up question. But I also see the point that having Markdown, having it in the repository versions and so on is definitely a huge advantage. I would actually prefer.
And the other thing I want to say is that it was not that in my presentation. That what I always argue is that the minimal matter is like having this part with context problem statement, consider options, and you say decision outcome, and you can skip the pros and cons section. You can have just a quick write down, even if some quality check could say, okay, well, no, it's too short. But I would say better a short ADR than no ADR. because now in the point that we don't have the issue with too many ADRs, we have the issue with too less ADRs. That it's always in our JabRef developer courses like, well, we changed the serialization format. Why is it like that? And say, well, in a developer conference 5 years ago, we decided that and that and that, and then it wasn't documented at all. And with MADR, I would say if we had MADR 5 years ago, it was documented better. This is my claim.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. To capture transient knowledge that is in the heads of some developers, and then the developer leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's definitely, and it's definitely something that you wouldn't maybe document in the source code as source code comments. But it's a different level of abstraction simply. And, yeah.
And the writing normal Markdown is something also like a burden. Like, why should I document that? Because maybe it's too unstructured, the normal documentation. So if I say to please document that in the wiki, then it's okay, what should I write now? And I think MADR just gives some structure to focus on. Maybe it's also my personal taste, because I really like that people say to me what options they considered but they didn't choose. Like, did you regard Quarkus for the REST API implementation in Java, or did you just forget about Quarkus? Because Quarkus is a tool raising now from Red Hat and IBM, gaining more and more importance. But it's too unimportant that everyone knows it, but too important not to consider it. And then I just want to ask why didn't you do that?
Or if it was considered at all, or if not, why?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Okay. Anybody else having any questions from the audience? So if not, yeah, we're definitely in schedule. I think the break was scheduled for past. We have quite long breaks of half an hour, but I would keep them just because people may have planned for that, and will just join us at at 8 a.m. my time, and whatever time it is for you. So in half an hour. But before we start the break and get some coffee or whatever you prefer, I want to thank Oliver for his keynote and for the lively discussion also afterwards. And as Christoph mentioned, Oliver will answer questions during ICCME as well. Christoph, when is the session scheduled? Or Oliver, you should also know.
That's right, Oliver should know this as well. But it is, let me look it up so I tell you the right thing. So it's tomorrow in the Europe time band of ICSME, which will be at 10 UTC time, which I believe in Europe is midday.
Yeah, 12 o'clock tomorrow, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so if
Looking
you
forward
can...
to that.
Exactly, and if you can think of any questions until then, feel free to approach Oliver again.
Yeah, maybe one night and then thinking of MADR and saying, well.
Exactly. Okay, great. Then thank you very much for the keynote, and thanks everybody else for attending the session. Yeah, some virtual applause, or unmute your microphones and give actual applause, and that's even better. Yeah, let's clap here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about some research I do in my free time. And it was a pleasure for me, and also I really liked this discussion. Thank you.
Great. Then, and for the others, see you in about half an hour for the challenge presentations and the tool demo.